I simply cannot find her. She's missing from the Abbey again.
We should have put a cowbell around her neck.
Have you tried the barn? You know how much she adores the animals.
In 1964, a single sound on a Hollywood set ruined 20 takes in a row.
Because you don't see it that much on camera.
You don't?
No, it has to be an absolute downpour before it's noticeable.
And the studio paid thousands of dollars to bury it forever. A 5-year-old child nearly drowned in front of Julie Andrews, and nobody told the public.
Come out of that water at once!
A helicopter knocked the leading lady flat into the dirt 7 times.
Every time the helicopter had finished, it went around me, but the downdraft from the jet engines just flung me into the grass.
While a famous actor secretly hated every word of the script. What you are about to hear was hidden for decades, and the truth is stranger than the movie itself. The gazebo lights that ruined the most romantic scene ever filmed. Let us start with the scene that almost broke the entire production, because this is the moment most fans have no idea actually happened. You know that gentle, glowing kiss between Maria and Captain Von Trapp inside the gazebo.
This is where all the movie's steamiest scenes took place, going on 17, and of course, where the captain and Maria shared that first kiss.
The one where the music swells and they sing something good together. It looks like the most romantic moment ever put on film. But behind the cameras, that single scene caused more chaos than anything else in the movie. The gazebo was the very last set built on the Fox lot in Los Angeles. It was also the last piece of the film to be shot. Cinematographer Ted McCord wanted a soft, dreamy silhouette to make the kiss feel magical. To get that look, he set up massive carbon arc lights behind the glass walls of the gazebo. These lights were industrial machines from the 1960s, and as the carbon rods burned down, they let out gas in loud, wet bursts. The sound was unmistakable. It sounded exactly like someone blowing a raspberry, a long, embarrassing, rude noise. And it happened every few seconds. Now, picture this. Julie Andrews and Christopher Plummer are standing nose to nose. The crew is hidden, even lying flat on the floor, so their reflections will not show in the glass. Plummer leans in, whispers, "I love you," and right at that moment, the lights overhead let out a wet, flat raspberry, then another one, then another one. Both actors completely lost it. They tried more than a dozen times to keep straight faces, and every single take was ruined by laughter. Julie Andrews finally told the full story decades later, after the studio had kept it quiet for years.
Well, you do the best you can, and these huge sound speakers are in the trees because you're lip syncing.
She said Chris would be looking into her eyes and saying, "Oh, Maria, I love you." And then there would be this awful raspberry coming from the lights above them. She said it was like a comment on their scene. Both of them would start laughing, and they simply could not help it. Director Robert Wise eventually gave up trying to fix the lighting and decided to shoot the whole scene in pitch silhouette, so the audience could never see their faces shaking from laughter. That glowing, dreamy style we all love today was not artistic genius. It was damage control. And honestly, when you find out the truth, it kind of makes the scene even more romantic, because you realize the giggles you see in their shoulders are completely real. But the gazebo had one more disaster waiting, and this one drew actual blood. The very last shot of the entire film was Charmian Carr dancing the 16 going on 17 number with Daniel Truhitt. Wardrobe forgot one standard procedure, which was gluing rubber pads to the bottom of her dance shoes. On the very first take, Charmian leapt onto the bench inside the gazebo, slipped, and crashed straight through one of the glass panels. She landed in a pile of broken shards with a badly sprained ankle. The on-set doctor rushed in and bandaged her foot. Makeup was applied over the bandage, stockings were added to hide the swelling, and her understudy was already being prepared to take over. Charmian refused. She danced the entire sequence on a swollen, painful ankle and finished every move. When the final shot was complete, The crew gave her a standing ovation. In some early prints of the film, you can actually see the bandage hidden under her stocking. And while all of that was unfolding inside the gazebo, an even bigger secret was being managed in another room of the studio. The voices you hear are not the voices you think they are. Then comes the part of the story that genuinely shocked me when I first learned it, because most fans go their whole lives believing something completely false about the movie. The two adult voices that carry some of the most beautiful songs in the film do not actually belong to the actors you see on screen. Both Captain Von Trapp and Mother Abbess were secretly dubbed over by professional singers, and the studio worked very hard to hide that fact from the public. Christopher Plummer had taken voice lessons for months before filming began. He genuinely wanted to perform Edelweiss himself, but when producers heard the playback in the recording booth, they decided his voice simply could not carry the emotional weight the song needed. So they quietly brought in a Disney veteran named Bill Lee, the same singer who had provided vocals for Prince Philip in Sleeping Beauty and the father in Mary Poppins. Lee recorded every musical note Plummer was supposed to sing, including the famous festival performance of Edelweiss. Plummer was not told about the decision until after the fact. He was furious. He felt his entire performance had been undermined, and in interviews he gave decades later, he admitted the dubbing wounded his pride more than anything else on the production. The producers had told him they could not take the risk, especially because Plummer had also tried to convince screenwriter Ernest Lehman to cut the song completely. Plummer thought Edelweiss was trite and forgettable. Lehman refused to remove it. Here is where the story becomes truly bittersweet. Edelweiss was the very last song lyric Oscar Hammerstein ever wrote. He completed the words while dying of stomach cancer at his farmhouse in Pennsylvania. He passed away on the 23rd of August in 1960, 9 months after the Broadway show opened. The lights of Times Square were dimmed for a full minute in his honor that night, and the lights of London's West End dimmed too. The very last word he ever wrote as a lyricist was the closing word of Edelweiss, which was the word forever. He never lived to see the film made. He never heard Plummer sing his final song, and he never knew that Plummer's voice would be replaced. The second secret dubbing was even more carefully hidden. Peggy Wood, the actress who played Mother Abbess, was 72 years old during filming. Her singing voice was no longer strong enough to handle Climb Every Mountain, which is one of the most powerful songs in the entire score. Producers brought in a soprano named Marjorie McKay to record the vocals, and Wise carefully filmed Wood in long shots and over-the-shoulder angles, so audiences would not notice her lips were slightly out of sync with the soaring voice they were hearing. Wood was a beloved stage actress who had performed the role beautifully on Broadway years earlier, and the decision was reportedly painful for her. She accepted it professionally, but never spoke publicly about it during the publicity tour. And these were not the only hidden details in the cast. Eleanor Parker, who played the elegant Baroness, also had her best material quietly stripped away before the cameras even started rolling, and she carried that disappointment with her for years. The cuts that stole the Baroness and the heartbreak hidden behind a smile. The Baroness in the original Broadway version was a sharp, complicated woman with two of the most cutting songs in the entire show. The first was called How Can Love Survive?, a witty number about how rich people cannot find romance because they have everything already. The second was called No Way to Stop It.
There's no way to stop it, no, there's no way to stop it if the earth wants to roll around the sun.
A darker piece in which the Baroness essentially shrugged off the Nazi takeover of Austria as something not worth fighting against. Director Robert Wise made the decision to cut both songs from the film. He wanted the Baroness softer, less political, more like a romantic obstacle for Maria, rather than a moral failure. Eleanor Parker fought for the songs, but lost. When the film was released, her character had been reduced to little more than a polite rival in a fancy dress, and Parker reportedly felt cheated of her best material for the rest of her life. But the saddest hidden detail of the entire production belonged to Julie Andrews herself. while she was filming the happiest movie of her career, smiling and singing on alpine meadows. Her real-life marriage was quietly falling apart. She had brought her 17-month-old daughter Emma with her to Salzburg, while her husband, Tony Walton, was thousands of miles away working on other projects. Friends on set later said you could see the cracks beginning to show, even as she radiated joy on camera. The marriage would not survive the years that followed. They separated in 1967 and divorced shortly after. And yet, every single day during production, Andrews showed up early, learned her lines, sang her heart out, and was kind to every member of the cast and crew. Even Christopher Plummer admitted she was, in his own words, terrifyingly sweet. She kept her personal grief invisible because the children on set needed a mother figure, and the studio needed a star. There is something quietly heroic in that, when you really think about it. And while Andrews was protecting her own heart in private, the production around her was about to get hit by something nobody could have predicted. Something that turned the dream alpine setting into a soggy, expensive nightmare. When Salzburg tried to drown the entire production. The original plan was beautiful on paper. Robert Wise and his crew would spend 6 neat weeks in Salzburg, capturing the rolling green hills, the historic fountains, the elegant gardens, and the stunning mountain views that would make audiences fall in love with Austria. The original budget was set at $8.2 million, which was already a serious amount of money for the mid-1960s. Everything was prepared. The locations were scouted. The cast was ready. Then the rain came. The year 1964 turned out to be the wettest year in Salzburg's recorded history. Days of filming turned into hours of waiting. Hours turned into entire weeks lost to thick gray skies. 6 weeks of planned location work stretched into 11 exhausting weeks. More than 250 cast and crew members sat trapped in their hotels, watching the rain come down outside their windows, while the budget bled out like a slow wound. The financial pressure was unbearable. Fox was already reeling from the disaster of Cleopatra, which had nearly bankrupted the studio just a year earlier. One studio insider reportedly whispered that The Sound of Music might be the final blow that ended 20th Century Fox completely. The thought of another budget disaster terrified executives in Los Angeles, and the daily phone calls between Salzburg and the studio became increasingly tense. Christopher Plummer, never one to suffer quietly, demanded he be moved out of the main hotel where most of the cast was staying. He insisted on the neighboring Hotel Bristol. His reason was telling. He said he did not mind the noise of the child actors. What he could not stand was the chatter of their mothers in the hallways and the lobby. So he relocated to the Bristol, where every evening he sat at the lobby's grand piano, drank schnapps by the glass, and banged away at the keys until the staff begged him to stop. In his memoir, Plummer admitted he hit the schnapps with what he called a vengeance, taking out his frustration on the poor innocent baby grand piano night after night. He said there was no one around to take him in hand and snap him out of it. The combination of rich Austrian food, endless wine, and pastries caused him to gain noticeable weight during the shoot. The costume department had to let his uniform out twice. By the time he filmed the climactic festival scene where he sings Edelweiss,
Edelweiss, Edelweiss,
the trousers had been altered yet again. He later admitted he was completely drunk during that take, which is wild when you watch the scene now and see how emotional and controlled the performance looks. Hollywood is a strange place, and the rain was only the beginning of the dangers waiting for the cast, the helicopter, that kept knocking Julie Andrews into the grass. Now picture the opening shot of the film. Julie Andrews stands alone in a vast green meadow with her arms outstretched, spinning in pure joy as the camera soars above her. It is one of the most recognized images in cinema history. It looks effortless. It looks magical. The truth of how that shot was filmed is honestly hard to believe. The crew used a jet engine helicopter to capture the sweeping aerial movement. The original cameraman assigned to the shot actually refused the job because the setup required leaning out of an open door with no safety harness while holding a massive 70mm camera. Cinematographer Paul Beeson stepped in and did it himself, wearing a suit and tie, with no door between him and the open sky. He held the camera steady so the helicopter's shadow would never cross Andrews on the ground. The helicopter circled in low and tight, and the downdraft from its rotors was like a hurricane at ground level. Andrews waited at one end of the meadow until megaphones positioned across the hillside told her exactly when to start spinning. Every single time the helicopter swept past her, the wind blast slammed her flat into the grass, like a wave knocking down a swimmer. She described it later by saying every time the helicopter went around her, the downdraft from the rotors leveled her into the meadow. She would try to signal the pilot to take a wider arc, but every time she looked up, all she got was a thumbs up from the pilot and a cheerful voice saying, "Let us do one more, you are doing fine." She was knocked over at least 6 or 7 times. She got up every single time, brushed off the grass and dirt, and smiled like nothing had happened. The final usable footage was likely caught in the precious few seconds right before she ate the meadow yet again. The next time you watch that opening, just know she was about 10 seconds away from getting tackled by the sky. The dangers did not end there. The famous boat scene from the Do-Re-Mi sequence almost became a tragedy. 5-year-old Kim Carruth, who played Little Gretel, could not swim. Nobody had checked beforehand. Julie Andrews was instructed to fall toward the child and grab her the moment the boat tipped over. But when the boat actually flipped on camera, Andrews fell the wrong direction. Little Kim went under the water once, came up coughing and gasping, and then went under a second time.
Oh, Captain, you're home!
It was Heather Menzies, the actress playing Louisa, who grabbed Kim by the hair and pulled her up to the surface. Andrews was shaken to the bone, convinced she had nearly drowned a child. Director Robert Wise quietly arranged swimming lessons for Kim the very next day, and the studio kept the entire incident out of every press release. For years, the cast remained silent about it. Kim would later say she developed a lasting fear of water that took years to overcome. And while the disasters were piling up in Salzburg, a quiet drama was unfolding back home in Hollywood about who would even be in this movie at all. The casting wars nobody talks about. Before Julie Andrews ever boarded a plane to Austria, the casting process had been one giant battlefield of egos and rejections. Christopher Plummer turned down the role of Captain Von Trapp multiple times. He thought the script was sentimental nonsense. He called the project the sound of mucus behind the scenes, and sometimes simply referred to it as S&M to his friends. He genuinely did not want to do it. Director Robert Wise flew to London personally to convince him. Plummer finally agreed, but only on one condition. He demanded that the character of the captain be rewritten to be more bitter, more cynical, more emotionally damaged. The writers reworked his lines, added more depth, and even commissioned Edelweiss specifically for him to give the captain a moment of softness. Plummer still complained. He took a flat fee with no profit sharing whatsoever, a decision he later called the biggest financial mistake of his career. Julie Andrews also nearly turned the role down. In her memoir, she admitted that playing Maria would be her second nanny part, right after Mary Poppins, and she worried about being typecast forever. It was her agent and Robert Wise who gently nudged her over the fence. She accepted the role for a flat $225,000, which sounds like a lot until you compare it to what others made. Mary Martin, who had originated the role on Broadway, earned over $8 million from her stage profits alone. Andrews never saw a single dollar in royalties from the film, no matter how many millions of tickets it sold. The children's casting was just as competitive. A young Mia Farrow auditioned 3 separate times for the role of Liesel. The casting notes simply read sweet, but no spark. Charmian Carr, who eventually got the part, was actually 21 years old playing a 16-year-old, which is wild when you watch the film today. Kurt Russell, Patty Duke, and Terry Garr all read for various roles and were passed over. Nicholas Hammond, who played Friedrich, would later become famous as the first live-action Spider-Man on television in 1977.
Hey, this is Nick with Comic Experience Sci-Fi, and it is my genuine thrill to be sitting next to Nicholas Hammond, the very first actor to play Spider-Man and Peter Parker in a live-action.
There was also a quiet tragedy on the day Charmian Carr received her casting call. The man who had been a father figure to her had just passed away minutes before the phone rang. She found out about both news in the same hour. She cried both for the grief and for the joy, all alone in her apartment. And as cast and crew settled into the production, the world outside the film was hiding a darker truth that the movie would never quite be able to face: the country. The movie forgot to tell the truth about The Sound of Music was a colossal hit almost everywhere on the planet.
Just about every child knows these words. You might be singing at home too, but few have had the chance to see them sung on stage. For many, the movie version of The Sound of Music.
It conquered America, Britain, Japan, France, India, and dozens of other countries. There is exactly one country where it bombed. That country happens to be the one the entire film takes place in. Austria simply did not care. Cinemas across Austria mostly refused to even play the film. It was not shown on Austrian state television until the mid-1990s, and even then it aired only once. The very first full Austrian stage production of The Sound of Music did not happen until 2005 at the Vienna Volksoper, a full 40 years after the film's premiere. Austrians had a popular saying about the movie, which roughly translated to what Austrian would ever eat schnitzel with noodles. The film simply did not feel Austrian to them. The deeper truth was uncomfortable. The film painted Austria as an innocent victim of Nazi Germany, a peaceful land of music and mountains forced into the war against its will. The reality was much uglier. When Hitler annexed Austria in 1938, huge cheering crowds greeted him in the streets of Vienna and Salzburg. Austria supplied a disproportionate share of camp guards and Nazi officers during the war. The country had spent decades trying to move past its complicated history, and a sugar-coated musical reminding everyone of that period was not welcome. When the production tried to film the Anschluss scene in Salzburg, locals refused to hang Nazi flags from their balconies. The city government said no. Citizens said no. Building owners said no. Robert Wise threatened to leave the city entirely. He then made a chilling counter-move. He announced he would use real archival footage from 1938, footage that showed actual Austrians cheering Hitler with their faces clearly visible. Some of those people were still alive. The flags went up after that, but the shots you see in the film are partly real history mixed in with the staged footage. The real Von Trapp family also had complaints. Maria Von Trapp watched the film and publicly said she liked it, but privately, she had a long list of frustrations. She felt the portrayal of her husband Georg was completely wrong. The real captain was, by every family account, a warm, gentle, music-loving father who played the violin and sang with his children every evening. The stern, cold patriarch in the film bore almost no resemblance to him. Maria once said it was actually she herself who needed thawing, not him. The famous escape over the mountains was also a beautiful lie. The mountain shown in the film leads directly into Germany, straight toward Hitler's mountain retreat, known as the Eagle's Nest. Switzerland is more than 300 kilometers away. Maria reportedly asked friends if anyone in Hollywood actually owned a map. The real family escape was much less cinematic. They simply boarded a train to Italy on the 13th of June in 1938, walked through customs as ordinary passengers, and the very next day, Hitler closed the border. No singing, no climbing, just a quiet train ride out of a country that was falling apart. And while the world fell in love with a fairy tale version of Austria, the man who hated the movie most spent decades trying to escape its shadow until something inside him finally changed. The reconciliation, the tears, and the word forever. For nearly 40 years, Christopher Plummer publicly mocked the film that made him a household name. He called it The Sound of Mucus in interview after interview. He cringed whenever fans approached him about it. He would roll his eyes if a journalist brought it up. And then, somewhere around the early 2000s, something inside him began to soften. He started attending Sound of Music sing-alongs. He showed up at anniversary tributes. He sat on panels and talked openly about the film with a kindness he had never shown before. In his 2008 memoir titled In Spite of Myself, he admitted he had behaved badly during production. He confessed he had been snippy and snobby with everyone, that he had treated his castmates coldly, and that Julie Andrews had been, in his own words, terrifyingly sweet to him anyway. In his final years, he made peace with the film completely. He said it was a happy film. He was grateful it existed and that it had blessed people around the world. That is a beautiful thing to admit, after spending decades resisting it. Plummer and Andrews remained close friends for the rest of his life. They worked together again on a television adaptation of On Golden Pond. They wrote each other birthday notes. He attended her American Film Institute Life Achievement Awards ceremony, where the surviving child actors surprised her on stage by singing Do Re Mi together. Andrews wept openly in her seat. Plummer passed away on the 5th of February in 2021 at the age of 91. Andrews remembered him as someone who was never once difficult to work with, who adored her from day one, and who remained her friend for the rest of his life. The surviving cast members carried the film like a family. Charmian Carr ran sing-alongs for years, dressing up as Liesl into her 60s, until she passed away in 2016 from complications of a rare form of dementia. Heather Menzies died of brain cancer in 2017. Each loss felt like the end of an era for fans who had grown up with these faces. Salzburg, the city that resisted the film so hard, eventually surrendered to its legacy. By the 2000s, Sound of Music bus tours had become one of Austria's biggest tourist attractions, drawing more visitors than Mozart's birthplace. The famous gazebo had to be moved 3 separate times because tourists kept jumping on the benches trying to recreate 16 going on 17 and spraining their ankles, just like Charmian Carr did on the very last day of filming. Locals admitted, often with a smile and a sigh, that the film paid the city's rent for decades. And here is the detail that ties everything together, the quiet thread that runs underneath the entire production. The very last lyric Oscar Hammerstein wrote before he died was the closing word of Edelweiss. He sat in his farmhouse in Pennsylvania, suffering from stomach cancer, knowing he did not have much time, and he wrote the word forever. He never lived to see the film. He never heard Plummer struggle with the song or hear Bill Lee secretly dub over it. He never witnessed the studio be saved from bankruptcy or watched the film conquer the world. He just wrote one word, and then he was gone. That single word echoes through the entire story like a heartbeat that never quite fades away. Forever. The rain came down in Salzburg, washing out schedules and draining budgets, and testing the patience of every soul on that production. Forever, the lights farted overhead during the most romantic scene ever filmed, turning whispered confessions of love into impossible fits of laughter. Forever, the helicopter knocked Julie Andrews flat into the grass, only for her to rise up and smile and try the spin again. Forever, a 5-year-old nearly drowned in front of a camera, while the world watched a joyful song about boats. Forever, a country pretended not to know its own painful history, while the rest of the world fell in love with its mountains. The story of The Sound of Music is not really about a singing nanny at all. It is about the messy, beautiful, painful, hilarious truth of how something perfect actually gets made in this world. Every flawless frame you see on screen was paid for in sweat and tears, and broken glass, and bruised pride and quiet heartbreak. And somehow, against every single obstacle nature and Hollywood could throw at it, this film became one of the most loved movies ever created in human history. What part of this story surprised you the most? Drop your thoughts in the comments below and let us know.